It's a well-known reality that TV shows, much like any other creative medium, can often be polarizing. Whether it's down to the subject matter, those involved in the project, or unfavorable tales from the set, many productions find that there is a contingent of the audience ready to pour scorn over the material before they've even had the chance to view the first episode. Now, luckily, many of these preconceptions turn out to be false, and shows do successfully win over even the most skeptical of viewers thanks to their overall quality. But that doesn't always happen, and sometimes we were bang on the money from moment one. With all this in mind, then, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 TV shows you were ready to hate. Number 10, Gossip Girl 2021. The 2020s are shaping up to be the age of nostalgia. Low-rise jeans and skinny scarves can be seen all over TikTok, and a huge slate of reboots have been hitting our screens in the TV realm. The original Gossip Girl went off the air in 2012, and much of the magic surrounding it did stem from the cultural climate that it was formed in. Considering that none of the original cast would be returning for this reboot, and that the titular Gossip Girl had already been unmasked in the final season, many were mystified as to how HBO intended to even revitalize this property. And after the new iteration debuted in 2021, those questions weren't exactly answered. See, Gossip Girl's continuation received muted reviews at launch that praised the cast but criticized the meaningless drama that fell flat with fans of the original who bothered to tune in to see it. Still, it garnered enough positive viewings from the fresh teenage audience who held no unfavorable comparisons to the original in order to get a second season. So overall, I guess, who are we to sniff at a show that a new generation are having fun with? Number 9, She-Hulk Attorney at Law. When a series surrounding She-Hulk was announced back in 2019, the response was primarily positive, as the introduction of a beloved female hero to the still overwhelmingly male-dominated MCU seemed like a step in the right direction. And then we all saw its trailer, and more importantly, the CGI. When transformed in these trailers, She-Hulk was a plasticky-looking lurid green supermodel that teetered somewhere between the Uncanny Valley and just Shrek. Both fans and critics immediately found it unreal and a little bit distracting, meaning that much of the expectation prior to release was less about the quality of the narrative or acting, and more about how terrible it was all going to look. While it remains somewhat egregious compared to the visual effects work of earlier Marvel properties, someone clearly intervened between the trailer and the first episode, because the CGI in the show is definitely a degree better than expected. Luckily, the writing and performances were also received much more positively, and She-Hulk is generally regarded as a decently fun foray into the MCU's take on sitcoms. Number 8, Dexter New Blood. When Dexter's original run came to a close in 2013, it's safe to say that it limped rather than strode over the finish line. Many were conflicted then when a limited sequel to the show was announced, with original showrunner Clyde Phillips back in the saddle. It's not that there wasn't belief in the showrunner themselves, more that the original ending was so disappointing that it seemed impossible that the state of the world this show would follow on from could actually be salvaged. However, Dexter New Blood later premiered on Showtime in 2021, following Dexter years after his fake death under a new false identity. It received praise for the consistently compelling portrayals and its attempts to revive the show's bloody magic, which should seem like a job well done. In a tragic case of history repeating itself, though, an almost equally divisive finale saw New Blood once again disappoint many fans, which is ironic considering such a fate is what the writing team deliberately set out to avoid. Number 7, Iron Fist. The last and least well-received of Marvel's original Netflix efforts, Iron Fist suffered in the public perception from the outset. Undeniably less popular than the comic characters upon which fellow Defenders titles were based, marketing was already starting out on the back foot. However, the show then went on to earn itself significant controversy in one of the worst possible fashions, that being accusations of cultural appropriation. With the main character Danny Rand's powers surrounding martial arts and stemming from traditional Chinese culture and mythology, it was impossible to escape a rightly perceived Orientalist white savior narrative. Despite this, Game of Thrones alum Finn Jones was ultimately cast in the lead role, and worries soon proved themselves warranted as both Jones's performance and the subject matter itself were unceremoniously panned. And even without this, just as a show itself, the first series was a total mess, with none of the spectacle or heart that you expected from a Netflix MCU show at the time, and while the second season was a little bit better, by then it was just too late. Number 6. Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's impossible to pass true judgment on a show that hasn't yet shown itself to the public, but let's face it, based on the evidence so far, hopes for Netflix's live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender adaptation aren't looking good. Now, the original series is of course beloved by everyone who's seen it, but the M. Night Shyamalan version is the exact antithesis of that reputation, leaving many skeptical of more adaptations of the great source material going forward. Even worse, Netflix itself doesn't have the best reputation right now either, especially after the absolute stinker that was the Death Note movie. However, hatred towards the upcoming adaptation did briefly turn to hope, thanks to the Netflix production budget, casting, and of course, the involvement of the original show's original creators as showrunners. That hope was short-lived though, as worries quickly surged again after it was announced that the showrunners had departed the project thanks to creative differences and a negative experience with Netflix. We still want this one to turn out well, we truly do, but at this point it just doesn't seem likely. Number 5. Dahmer: Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. True crime has always been massive. However, as is the nature with any adaptation of real-life events, this inevitably divides critics and consumers alike. After all, the lives of those depicted deserve a level of care and respect that they are not always afforded, especially in true crime. The latest show to brew up this particular storm is Netflix's Dahmer, which sees horror auteur Ryan Murphy executive produce a dramatization of real-life serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer's life, with Evan Peters in the title role. Obviously, far from the first screen portrayal of Dahmer, the show nevertheless drew mass publicity and criticism thanks to its perceived sensationalization, dramatizing real tragedies for horror content. Despite the negative press, which ballooned further after Netflix applied and then subsequently removed the LGBTQ+ tag from the show, Dahmer quickly became Netflix's second most watched English language series of all time. Critically though, it has received mixed reviews, which often praise the performances and self-aware nature of the show, but agree that the staging of the narrative does land it in exploitative territory. Number 4. Halo. Historically, of course, film and television adaptations of video games have rarely been well received, but considering that there has been a shift towards long-form television adaptations over films recently, which arguably suits the typically massive runtimes of games far better, public perception to some of these projects is gradually becoming more positive. Halo, however, is probably not one of these trendsetters. While Paramount Plus's series did make some winning choices, such as having the original voice actress for Cortana reprise her role, the initial trailers raised concerns for many longtime fans of the iconic franchise. See, the show was seen as being both too derivative of other sci-fi shows, as well as not being an accurate Halo adaptation, as well as harboring issues in costuming and production value. At the end of the day, if fans don't think the Master Chief feels like the Master Chief, well, you're going to have a problem adapting Halo. In reality, reviews of the final product proved to be much more mixed than outright negative. Hardcore game and comic fans derided the show's faithlessness, while critics and more casual fans and newcomers alike praised the action and performances, but heavily criticized the writing and story. Thankfully, Halo made the explicit choice to be set in an alternate universe from the main games, ensuring that their take on the source material doesn't influence the original canon and can't directly be compared in that way. So he's hoping the greenlit second season will fix its mistakes and build itself into a version of Halo that is worthwhile. Number 3. Netflix's Resident Evil. Resident Evil is a franchise that is no stranger to Hollywood, but it's also one of the most mistreated game-to-film properties. So many adaptations completely do away with the source material altogether, or wrap it into something almost unrecognizable. And Netflix's most recent adaptation is absolutely the worst offender of this. So, when it was announced that the narrative was going to be going wildly away from the games, focusing on 2 timelines and the children of Albert Wesker, most people braced for the worst. Now, no matter what the die-hard fans say, changing the source material isn't always a bad thing if the original story is any good, but sadly here, it definitely was not. Despite Lance Reddick's valiant efforts in providing a genuinely commendable performance as key villain Albert Wesker, one man cannot save a show alone, and the middling critical reception combined with extreme fan backlash saw the show cancelled soon after release. Number 2. The Rings of Power. A television series based on the appendices of The Lord of the Ring should have seemed solid in theory, especially with a sign-off on the project from the Tolkien estate, proposed involvement of film series director Peter Jackson, and a staggering budget of $1 billion thrown behind it. However, the mistakes of The Hobbit had many fans skeptical, and worries only increased as a series of departures and halts were announced amid production. Jackson, it turns out, was out, with the series legally required to have no connection to the film franchise. Foremost Tolkien scholar Tom Shippey would also not be involved in the production, and filming was also halted in New Zealand for an extended period thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. All in all, despite being the most expensive show ever produced, The Rings of Power's prognosis was not looking good, and whether or not the show felt satisfying or stagnant upon release is largely a matter of personal perspective. While the vast budget was clear in the visual effects and production design, many criticized it as feeling soulless in its characterization and pacing. There is promise in the show for sure, but after years of hype and this much money, maybe it was always doomed to disappoint. Number 1. The House of the Dragon. Few TV shows have betrayed fans quite so spectacularly as Game of Thrones. Following the almost maliciously bad 8th season, it seemed that the reputation of both the series and its showrunners had been ruined for good. Nothing could bring Game of Thrones back from the dead, no matter how many red priestesses you chucked at it. Well, that was our prognosis, and HBO completely disagreed. So, a prequel based on author George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood received a straight-to-series order in October 2019, despite the overwhelmingly negative public and critical response to the end of its parent series. While expectations of the show had become more positive by the time of its premiere thanks to the casting of lead actors like Matt Smith and Paddy Considine, and the entrusting of the material to Battle of the Bastards' director Miguel Sapochnik as showrunner, it still arrived with a sense of foreboding. Game of Thrones had burned its audience too badly, and getting it to trust again would be an almighty task. But in a move that all of us are now eternally great for, House of the Dragon actually turned out to be good. As in, seriously bloody excellent. As in, by far the best show on this list. Record numbers turned in for the first episode, and thanks to a spot of ingenious viral marketing born from some inspired cast interviews, even more are now turning up to see what all the fuss is about. So yeah, god damn it, House of the Dragon, you somehow managed to pull it off. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Has there ever been a show that you thought you would hate that you ended up loving, and what do you think about the ones I've mentioned today? Let me know, and while you're down there, could you please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to What Culture for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.